What do I want? I guess I want to be at peace with myself. I never really feel like I'm doing enough. I'm never really settled. I guess I want to solve myself. I want to understand myself. So I desperately want you to understand me. And I also don't. I'm horrified when you tell me who I am. I actually want to be this mysterious, incomprehensible person. I want to be something of worth. I want to be recognized as special. So I need to keep working, but I don't really know what I'm expecting out of this. Every time I achieve something, I feel pretty empty. I keep thinking the next thing will make me happy, and it never does. So I guess I'm scared of being alone. So I made this facade with the accomplishments and the, necessary humility to not drive people away, to still draw you in. And yes, I love the crowds, the anonymous deposits of validation. But of course, I also want that one special someone. I want them to somehow see through the facade. At least I think I do. But when they do, when they actually know me, they won't like me. I know they won't like me. They're going to be horrified. And if they do like this real me, well, then I think there's probably something wrong with them. So I'll have to end it. I guess that's why I've had an endless string of situationships. Deep down, I don't want things to change. Every time something bad has happened, it's some sort of change. And whenever something good finally happens, it eventually ends. So what's the point of any of this if none of it lasts? I guess that's why I guess I'm focused on myself in the end. Why should I care about anything else,
Para bailar la bamba, para bailar la bamba, yo necesito una poca de gracia para mí, para ti. Arriba, 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 por ti seré, por ti seré, por ti seré. Yo no soy marinero, soy capitán, soy capitán, soy capitán. Bam, 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 la, bam, bam.
These are problems that people have that have been there since very early in their life, and they're like life patterns that are very self-destructive. So, for example, someone who was abused by their father may develop a mistrust schema, and then all through their life they feel that they can't trust people because they think they're going to hurt them the same way that their father maybe hurt them. So, and then the pattern repeats and they never know. They always think someone is planning things against them or is going to do something to hurt them, and then it's a self-destructive pattern.
Okay, so the world is this big, scary place, especially when you're a kid. And I was a pretty scared kid. So I adopted some ways to cope. Why? Well, I'm a biological organism hell-bent on self-preservation at all costs. So these adaptations, these ways to cope, became who I was and who I am today. These are schemas, broad organizing principles that help me make sense of myself and the world in order to survive. Things like, I don't know, I need to be perfect to be loved, or the world is dangerous. Of course, as I got older, these become not very useful, but they're also literally me. They make my identity. So I try my best to reinforce them, either by escaping from things that could provide evidence contrary to my schemas, or through counterattacking, which means actively working to sustain them in some way. That's easy to do at home, Feeling bad about myself, I can just escape by watching some porn, or I can overwork myself to prove that even though deep down I'm unlovable, at least I'm a hard worker. But what about when I travel, when I leave home? Most of us hear of finding oneself, or the cliche stories of those traveling to monasteries and they'll come back changed. Why? Well, when you travel, your ability to escape and counterattack are kind of screwed. You're in a new environment with different people and a different culture. Sometimes you just have to deal with it. You have to sit with yourself, with your feelings on long flights, and adapt to unexpected situations. This is reflected across a lot of different religions. You know, the idea that salvation or enlightenment depends on the extent to which the soul dissipates its essentially voluntary ignorance. The thing that will save you can only be found in yourself. And this insight should halt your endless desperation to simultaneously escape from pain and satisfy all desires. I've been really guilty of both the last few months, and look where that got me. So why not lean fully into discovering this self-knowledge? Sounds fun. So let's go. Let's untie the knots and find what's left of me at the end of it all.
Ma Dory.
Kierkegaard sees anxiety as this dizziness, this dread over all of one's possibilities. It's that classic existential despair when you realize you can do whatever because nothing matters, which I've dealt with for a while. It's kind of fun. You get to smoke cigarettes and listen to jazz and wear trench coats. However, the longer I go thinking about this vague anxiety over the existential condition, the more it sharpens and defines itself. It begins to take on the form of something far more specific, a fear. In a nightclub bathroom, I looked into a mirror. I was pretty drunk, and I had the thoughts I usually tend to have when I see myself. It's kind of a carousel of feigned self-approval and disgust. I'll adjust my hair, I'll turn my chin slightly. I'll think, wow, I look really good. I really enjoy myself. I really think that I'm amazing, that people should be lucky to be around me. Of course, sometimes I think quite the opposite. I think, wow, you're really pathetic. Your life is a mess, you're an absolute fraud, etc. This time, I guess I got sick of the back and forth. And as I stared at myself in the mirror, I wondered aloud why my opinion of myself is so extreme. It seems so heavily reliant on the external, compliments, partners, revenue, people actually wanting to hang out with me. And if those aren't there, I desperately seek them. I will immediately see myself as flawed, evil, cruel, stupid, ugly. This is my attachment to worldly impressions that leaves me in a state of constant want. In terms of self-esteem, I entirely lack object permanence. If I don't have a reason to like myself, then there is really no reason to like myself at all. So I looked at myself a little longer, and I remember thinking, I really, really like myself. I'm impressed by myself, and I expect people to validate me for this, but I can't honestly say I love myself. I stood there and tried to genuinely say it to myself, and I couldn't. I couldn't say, I love you. This is the fear. Deep down, I hate myself. I'm bad, or I'm fundamentally flawed. If somebody knew me for who I truly was, they would reject me. I don't deserve love. I am, in some way, defective. And this belief is the driving force behind most of my life, the inescapable, irreconcilable feeling that I am unworthy.
C'est un visage qu'on peut pas oublier. Maintenant que j'ai vu, je peux pas oublier. Mais ça me va très bien que tout le monde pense qu'il est affreux et tout ça.
I don't know where the rupture happened. I do have memories of a period in which I was okay with myself, but to this day, to know that my worth is flimsy and conditional has marked every relationship I've ever been in. I feel the most chemistry with partners who reinforce my defectiveness, that make me work for their approval. Chemistry really is just this equation of fear plus desire. And I, of course, devalue partners that value me, that somehow see through the facade and still accept me. Because I see myself as worthless, I then think that there must be something wrong with them if they actually like me, right? My defectiveness also takes rejection as the default. It functions off of shame, a deep shame that tells me that my existence is fundamentally wrong, and so I need to maintain an impressive facade under the aloof and superior attitude that what I am doing comes easy to me or is natural. This is to protect myself from ever being actually found out. So I keep people at a distance. I will neglect the people I love. And funny enough, in this society, defectiveness works wonders. What's a greater motivation for success than the fear of never being loved? I can mask my flaws with accolades and applause before they're ever discovered. And I have, in fact, achieved a great deal. But that doesn't help. There's this discrepancy between the success I have experienced and how I truly feel about myself. Plus, the pressure to maintain such a facade can become way too much, so I'll escape in drinking or sex, my two personal favorite self-numbing vices, to cope. Of course, these behaviors reinforce the shame that drives defectiveness. In fact, that's the fun thing about schemas. They reinforce themselves because we need to hold deeply to an idea of who we are, and who I am is derived from the theories I made about the world as a kid that would help me grab onto anything that resembled love. I was drawn to the compulsion of authenticity that is prevalent in Western culture, this dog-eat-dog view that prioritizes the promotion and perfection of the self as a form of finding salvation. This was my answer to the question of how I can be loved. I'll be loved when I become the best version of me.
Je voulais avoir le visage de Robert Taylor.
No Face in Spirited Away is a spirit who quickly adapts to the personalities of those around him in order to be loved. Of course, in time and surrounded by enough greed, he himself becomes a horrifying and greedy monster. Through relying on the judgment of worth by others, he is evidently susceptible to the worst in others. Like him, I became attached to an ever-shifting and relative source of self-esteem, adopting the attitudes of the society I was born into. My sense of self was chameleon-like, and I struggled to define any personal values or any meaningful direction in my life.
You know, I don't know if I'm living sometimes or if I'm doing a to-do list. And then I don't know whose to-do list it is sometimes.
Rather than a solution, validation was a coping mechanism. I knew deep down some sort of self-love still wasn't possible. I hoped that through deceiving others that I am brilliant, I have worth or value, I could briefly feel some sort of validation or love, and then maybe I too could trick myself into loving myself. But this wouldn't last long. One bad mark, one insult, and off I go again, feeling worthless. Even now that I have achieved some success, I see myself deliberately sabotaging myself, repeating habits that I know will only result in a greater sense of shame. How strange is that?
I think if you're going to try to live a creative life as a writer or as a human being, period, one of the things you have to give up is the popularity contest. Running against the grain, running counter to the ways of the world is the purpose of our lives. We're here to repair the world, not to help it be the way it has been.
If you can't love yourself, then you can't love anyone else.
It's a common saying, and most of my relationships have been reminders of this in some way. I've either attempted to derive my worth entirely through another person, or I've been so scared of being known that I've closed myself off entirely, removing any potential for rejection that comes with a sort of genuine and shared vulnerability. I guess this is where the journey begins. This emptiness or void that I feel inside. It's like a big question mark, a big problem that needs some sort of solution, and my schemas sort of act as this solution. So my life is a little bit like a platform game where I'm constantly jumping from one source of external validation to another in order to stay upright, and every once in a while the jump is too big or I mess up and I fall, feel like I'm dying. There's never any stability. I never feel like I'm securely in a state of feeling good about myself. It's this endless and highly addictive journey to higher and higher levels of approval and self-esteem with no end in sight and surely no stability. Of course, this stems from my fear of being unlovable. And as stated, I know in the end that I can't be loved. But as a social animal, I need to feel it in some way. And growing up and perceiving love as adoration, as validation, and success led to an easy gateway to at least some form of success. Inwardly, we are whirlpools of misery and mischief, and therefore to be regarded outwardly as a great figure is gratifying. This craving for position, for prestige, for power to be recognized by society as being outstanding in some way is a wish to dominate others, and this is a form of aggression. And what is the cause of this aggressiveness? It is fear, isn't it?
A photo I'm talking about.
Look at that, bro. Look at those jumpers. Have I really accepted my defectiveness? If I did, if I was okay with saying to myself, you will never be loved, you're unlovable, then that would lead me down a pretty dark path. However, overall, I hold on to some hope that something will prove my worth. Day to day, I convince myself that this defectiveness can somehow be solved through validation, through numbers. And yes, for a while, I did get those little hits of impressing people, compliments, praise becomes very addicting. Then, like any addiction, validation moved on from something I wanted and derived pleasure from to something that I needed just to get by. It became a basic need to keep me functioning. I am deeply afraid of when the eyes drift away from me, when I am inevitably forgotten, when I am not given the attention I think I deserve. And so out of necessity rather than desire, I feel entirely entitled to your attention.
I think you kind of hit a part of it on the head. When I talk good about trans people or women's issues, it is all reward, minimal risk. At most, I risk manosphere guys calling me a simp or something. But like, the reward is clout, money, notoriety, and being seen as one of the good ones. Mm-hmm. And so like, I think a lot of people higher on the hierarchy of social identities, that's a draw. That's a draw to a lot of people, especially since I was never going to be like, a basketball player or, excel in a more traditionally esteemed position for a man, you know. So like this other lane, like that's a criticism, that's kind of a stereotype of male feminists or whatever, but it's based somewhat in fact, you know.
This all seems pretty contradictory. I feel inferior, but I also feel special enough to deserve validation. However, it makes more sense to view this as coming from a place of need rather than desire. I need your validation on an existential level. Rather than surrendering to my defectiveness, I actively counterattack it repeatedly through proving that I am special in some way. Because if I'm not special, then I'm average. And if I'm average, I simply do not matter. I need to overcompensate in terms of what I can provide to others in order to make up for my fundamental lack. I can't simply be myself. I desperately need your approval to prove to myself that, for the moment, I'm okay. Take what you're watching, for example. How can I justify talking about myself for this long? I mean, not to spoil anything, but this is a film about the struggles of a fairly materially successful straight white guy living in one of the safest countries on Earth. This is pretty damn self-indulgent. Someone with my platform should probably be talking about more important things, and to be completely honest, any amount of tragedy or trauma I've endured has been in some way self-induced. I wouldn't even really know what a systemic barrier looked like. Drinking, sleeping around, ruining friendships, even coming here, sleeping in hostels, hiking for hours, and taking long bus rides, or God forbid exposure to a culture unlike my own, these are all voluntary choices. It's all rooted in this desperate attempt to feel some sort of conflict and then surmount it. Because being who I am affords me long days of peaceful contentment, where I can have the luxury worries about girls and friendships and complain about social issues that I would never even be aware of if I forgot my Wi-Fi password. I did this, traveling here, because I wanted to feel something. In a sort of eat, pray, love fashion, I have now entered into the genre of the many other privileged folks who use the discomfort of the other to discover themselves. This is the spectatorship of suffering, where the impoverished conditions of others act as a dehumanizing reminder of how life isn't actually all that bad. Why am I unhappy with so many things? This is where I start talking about spirituality, and then I start telling the minimum wage workers and unemployed in the audience that money actually doesn't matter. Love does. Of course, I can only reach this understanding through enough money to safely subject myself to the most beautiful and privileged of deprivations, travel. And then I have to ask myself, did I reach a more enlightened understanding of materialism, or did I simply forget what it's like to not have money? And why do I feel the need to tell you? Because I need a sort of currency that is far more powerful than money. I need your attention. It's a sort of endless hunger for more and more. To satisfy this requires a serious ability to narrativize, to write meaning into random events, and place myself in the center as the main character. Other people in my life serve as guides, or reminders to my hero's journey, which makes it all the easier for me to feel entitled to their time and aid. It also leads to terrible relationships where my moments of blind narcissism remind my friends, partners, and family that they are not on equal footing, that at the end of the day, this is my story. Nothing else matters. And journeying outwards past my junkyard of failed relationships, entitlement can also lead me to fillet social concerns for my own self-actualization. Out of a genuine concern for others and this naively liberal urge to make the world a better place for the disenfranchised, minority groups, the oppressed, sea turtles, I still can't help but wrest a certain amount of myself from this perverse need to spread awareness through myself, to center myself in some way, as if my life is too good, so now I need to suck the misery and despair out of every political issue. Why not step aside? How much of this is really about them, about others? This very film serves my entitlement. I wouldn't make it without thinking, I deserve some of your time. You should listen to me. And even the tone of it, this martyrizing of myself, this confessional that is supposed to absolve me from the sins of having an ego, is meant to garner some level of praise. Am I not fishing for further approval when I openly exclaim that I hate myself? To play out that tired schema where you, the audience, reassures me of my worth. Ethically, why do it? Well, there's a lot of people that look a lot like me, that grow up with similar pathologies and values and inherit some fairly influential power structures. Sometimes they obtain YouTube channels or advertising firms that reinstate the habitus of a frayed and consumptive world, and sometimes they inherit positions that actively inform policy. These people, blissfully unaware of their entitlement or temporarily aware, if only to present themselves as one of the good guys, treat the world like a lever that they'll keep pulling until they feel good about themselves, because they don't honestly love themselves. I mean, why go through all this effort if not to fill some serious inner void? And perhaps I'm projecting, and yes, my self-exploration is extremely othering. It's my experience after all. I'm not black, I'm not a girl, and I'm not you. But I hope that this sort of confessional extends to the equally powerful and empty among you, to the materially comfortable with the means to be existentially depressed. Let me, in a way, be your mirror.
I've named this one Bird Sebastian.
When Darwin reached the shores of Tierra del Fuego, the last stop in South America before the Antarctic, he was greeted by the strange sight of fire. Here lived the Yamana, a tribe that had learned to cope with the extreme cold through huddling up, cultivating fire, and evolving significantly higher metabolisms. In terms of culture, the Yamana believed in a spirit who both gave and took life. Being an animist culture, they considered all natural phenomena as spirits, and they also held various rites of passage, including the Kina ceremony for young men, in which boys were taught the mythology that substantiated their supremacy over women. I think about the mythology served to me as a kid. The good life amounted to achieving a particularly perfect performance of masculinity, involving competence and dominance, and with little else in terms of theology or identity to guide me, I endeavored to become the best man I could be. I became perfectionistic, not just in one domain, but in terms of living itself. My identity became a task, a project that I could get right if I work hard enough at it. In my natural state, I need to be constantly striving. And so I substituted status for genuine emotional connection, finding one a lot easier to get a hold of than the other. And in the end, once I achieve this status, I'll find salvation. I'll be happy, because I'll no longer be mediocre. Even when the weather is bad, or I lose at a board game, I'll think to myself, damn, I could have prepared better. Even spending a night alone feels like some sort of failure. And if somebody doesn't like me, I take it as a fact. They have successfully seen in through the performance and can now observe me for who I am, incompetent, fraudulent, and weak. I once again feel like a vulnerable little boy, weeping and worthless, failing at the one thing I need to do in order to survive. Some studies suggest that perfectionism develops when there is a disconnect between the emotional needs of the child and the emotional style of the caregiver. From this, the child develops a sense of others as critical and quick to reject. I see this when I have wronged someone or have come up short in some way. Immediately I think to myself, well, this is the end of that relationship. And ironically, I then alienate myself to the point of social disconnection. I'm literally isolating myself through my solution to social disconnection, the impossibly high standards I have set for myself. Nowadays, I have little in the way. I work for myself, I have nobody telling me what to do, and that means I also have very little sense of direction. I have nothing to really tell me what perfection is. On Sunday evenings, I feel a perverse nihilism. What is perfect, really? The one consistent message I've told myself throughout my life is this: to be perfect is to not be myself.
My drug's attention, I'm an addict and I get paid to indulge in my habit. It's all an illusion, I'm wearing makeup, I'm wearing makeup.
To feel entitled to your validation, I need to be perfect, and to be perfect is to stow away all of those messy urges and feelings. So I view my personality as entirely reworkable. Who I am is a blank canvas. My most common self-directed question is, why am I like this? To curb this, I crafted a pretty decent persona that could charismatically navigate the social world, impressing and wowing my audience every step of the way. Of course, this process entailed a serious withholding of my lesser tendencies. If I let them out, if I opened up, I feared that people would reject me. Even worse, it would reveal that in the end I had little say in who I could be. Out of necessity, I withheld my emotions. My inner world didn't matter. It didn't even exist. I thought, as long as I could trick others into loving me, maybe I could trick myself into doing the same. I was a kid who held a deep interest in life. Nature, dinosaurs, music, film, animation, humor, the supernatural, pirates. I was deeply romantic and passionate and, according to my parents, extremely theatrical. But I learned over time that these passions were wrong. They stopped me from being who I could be. As I grew up, I gravitated towards the conservative ethos that echoes across many self-help spaces online. Holding it all in was a virtue. This is most evident in relationships. I tend to find solace in beginnings. Once the tough part of a relationship rears its head, I find an excuse. Any excuse. I'm bored or my partner isn't perfect enough, but under all of this, I struggle to be vulnerable, to ask for what I actually want. In order to repeat the deep personal truth that I'll never be loved, I need to withhold my emotional needs from my partners. Then I can guarantee my disappointment. In Patagonia, I was surrounded by a land of dinosaurs, long-lost pirate hideouts, strange animals, and beautiful mountains, a culture of music and dance entrenched in a language of emotional expression. I was surrounded by everything that I enjoyed as a kid, and I also met someone who I quite liked. There was a comfort in their presence, a sort of lightness that carried our interactions, subsumed, of course, by the cold rush of time. To know throughout that this will end. So I shouldn't hold on too tightly. But I did. And after years of lacking in vulnerability, I confessed my feelings. And there is something about that moment when you just say how you feel. And I was genuinely heartbroken when it wasn't reciprocated. I felt like that little boy again, ashamed and abandoned. I felt like I had been tricked. I had momentarily shown my true colors, a rare occasion. And for what? I felt ashamed. I felt weak and mortal and human, and yet it's one of the most freeing moments of my entire life, to give and not expect anything in return. I think this is why love is so important. Temporarily, someone extracts the rays from your shadow and you get to be yourself. I came home from Patagonia understanding not that I should go on some insane orgy, rave, drug bender and just be who I am in terms of my seemingly worst and most destructive impulses, Rather, I accepted that those emotional aspects of myself, the intense passion and romance I can so suddenly feel, is just a part of who I am. And when I harness rather than inhibit these parts of myself, I am happier and freer. I am me. Of course, is this experience not entirely schematic? How interesting is it that I would fall for somebody who I cannot realistically be with? In just a few days, I felt so much. But doesn't this say more about me than this person? In the final analysis, I've played out my perfect fantasy, being fixed by the validation of a beautiful other without any real commitment to change, any real attachment. I don't view love as this beautiful process of working on myself. Rather, love is something that happens to me that I obtain. It's another dead end. Why? Because deep down, I'm scared. After this, I'll return home and sink into my old habits. I'll struggle to be open. I'll shy away from people. It's the last schema fundamentally tied to my defectiveness that I'll simply call fear. I struggle deeply with the fear that either I will do something wrong, suffer some demise, go insane, or perhaps even worse, I'll do everything perfectly, and in the end, inevitably something outside of my control will go wrong. That means every day is greeted with a new fear. That bump is cancer, that slice of geopolitical news makes me regret not getting a fallout shelter, my friend not responding is a sign that I have deeply hurt them. My past is filled with regrets that will compound and take me out at the height of my success, and each new action I take can easily open me up to my own demise. Overall, I'll exaggerate the risk and underestimate my own ability to cope. I suppose this is a way of gaining control. By assuming the worst as an inevitability, I'll never be caught off guard. I'll suffer a little bit, every moment, instead of living in ignorance and then suffering all at once when it blows up. Because it will blow up. Because I am fundamentally bad. I am motivated by selfish concerns. I have amassed success despite being a fraud. I have hurt people in the past. Despite material comforts, I am unhappy. I am deeply afraid of losing what little facade I have that's even keeping me going, that's buying me time. I guess I do believe in a sort of cosmic justice. In spite of my lack of religion or belief in a god, it appears that I have imposed some sort of anti-religion onto the world and myself, where a negative spirit inhabits the souls of all of us. Everything is bad, and I don't give any space for redemption, and all I have is my pretentious cynicism to give me a few more pleasurable feelings of validation as I await the final punishment. I do everything out of fear. The perfectionism I developed in order to win your validation is one rooted in a fear of unworthiness. And what great success I achieved through these coping mechanisms. How impressive is it that I can achieve so much through the fear of actually being myself?
But when you go home, that's the most important. When you go home, it's like you should take off the mask. So it's not about everyone else. You can show everyone the part of you, and it's correct because you don't have to be 100% yourself with your coworkers. But when you go home, you really need to be authentic because that's home. If not, it's not going to be home. If you're going to always wearing a mask.
Yeah, I think sometimes when I'm alone, it's I feel kind of not empty, but things don't matter as much, I think, which is it's I need people to, which is I'm a YouTuber, so this makes sense, but it's I need people to watch me or to be aware of what I'm doing for the actions to make sense, or else there's no sort of meaning behind them, which I think could be a good thing, but can also be a very bad thing, because then it's there's no real stable sense of who I am, I think, sometimes.
or the things that you enjoy when you're like, who you are when the lights turn off, you know? But in a way, it's very contradicting, because in a way you like everyone to watch, but you don't want no one to really, really see you, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I like that. I want to be watched, but not to be seen, I guess.
Seen.
That's like a...
But, you know, even if you hide yourself, one day someone is going to discover you. Like, even if you don't want to, like, someone is going to be able to see through you, and you're going to need to, like, learn that is not someone trying to get into your life and trying to disrupt everything. They're just trying to love you and actually see, taking the time to actually see, because they care about you. It's not, they don't want to attack you, you know. This is not fear. Nobody's going to destroy. It's just someone really caring.
What is fear? It's this expectation that the pain of yesterday is going to happen today. What are schemas, if not these rigid thoughts that I created in order to anticipate the pains of one's yesterday, of one's childhood? This fear of dying alone, of being unworthy, it's always anticipatory. Convinced that I can somehow avoid it through hard work, validation, success, or whatever, I nonetheless feel that in the end it will all inevitably lead to the same results. Because these expectancies, these results are based on the past. A past I can barely recall, let alone alter. I can't think myself out of this one. It's this exhausting, never-ending attempt to rationalize everything about myself. Like, you know, you keep sharpening a pencil, it's eventually going to run out. Only then, when I do all of this thinking, do I think, oh wow, I've solved myself. So I attach to ideas, philosophies, theories, people, half-baked images of a better me. They fit into a logic, they make sense, and they give me a sort of security. And when they're threatened, that's where I feel the fear. I act out of fear, out of desperation. Instead of confronting these fears, going through them, I go around them. I avoid vulnerability. I do not open up, and so I do not let anyone in. In the end, I cannot love. Love and fear cannot coexist. I fear myself, and so I cannot love myself. I didn't find myself in Patagonia. In fact, the whole trip was nothing more than the same old me doing the same old things in a new place. But it gave me the false sense that I had. This spectacle of interesting people, interesting places, nonetheless left me unchanged. One New Yorker writer likens travel to a boomerang. It brings you right back to where you started. Yes, I did begin to feel better, and I feel much better now, but this was only months after I realized that traveling all the way to the ends of the earth wouldn't fix me. A relationship wouldn't fix me. Universal admiration wouldn't fix me. And eventually I came to realize that nothing would fix me. That's because this entire time, I saw myself as a problem to be fixed, to be solved, to be reduced to a formula. Self-help books, philosophies, religions, they give me an objective answer to the question of who I should be. There is something impersonal about this technique. Anyone can apply the formula. Embedded within its own cluster of genetics, interactions, experiences, and social influence. How could I possibly apply a generic answer to the deeply personal question of who I am? Being, then, is not a problem to be solved, but rather a mystery to be experienced. And only I can actively engage in this mystery. I have lived a life in captivity, an existence in which I have time and time again surrendered to these abstractions, these limits I've put on myself, and this is why I was so miserable, driven by fear, bound to these ideas of who I am. In doing so, I had neglected a sort of formless reflection involved in the present. I had denied a receptivity to the world, both externally and internally, in the service of maintaining these rigid self-beliefs. Most of all, I had denied myself a certain unity with existence, a unity crucial in understanding this mystery. I had become a slave to myself. This captivity was apparent in my relationships. I failed to open myself up because I had locked myself into this idea of who I am, an idea that I needed to retain in the hopes of solving myself. And so I was never with someone truly. I was always separate in the sense of hierarchy, where I would see myself as superior or inferior. But I wasn't with them, side by side. I had denied myself the ability to truly be with someone as a friend or lover, with each of us bonded by a fellowship larger than ourselves. This could only happen if I freed myself, if I opened myself up to both give and be given to. I must be strong enough to give and even stronger to ask for what I truly want. My thoughts and schemas have directed my life to this point. They themselves are driven by desire and fear. By counterattacking and escaping, I follow my desires and my fears. I fear this, I desire that, but there's something else that has driven me. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but it's the whole reason why I made this. It's the whole reason why I'm still here. And I don't know if it's an implicit part of human nature or an active choice, and hey, maybe it's a complete illusion.
컨벤션っていうのは意志が筋肉なんですよ。意志を表現、運命を表現する意志を表現するんです。運命があっても。
It simply tells me that this is worth it in some sense. I have faith that something good will come of this, whatever this is. I suppose I have faith in living still, in still trying. This is Marcel's idea of a strange hope. Hope consists in asserting that there is at the heart of being, beyond all data, beyond all inventories and all calculations, a mysterious principle which is in connivance with me. It is desire open-ended, an act of patience directed towards some form of salvation without any say in what such salvation will look like. It involves a commitment to humility, which in other terms means a return to the present and the admission that I know very little about myself or others.
You know, people hold on to these images of father, mother, husband, wife, again, for the same reason, because they seem to provide some firm ground. But there's no wife there. What does that mean? A wife, a husband, a son. A baby holds your hands, and then suddenly there's this huge man lifting you off the ground, and then he's gone. Where's that son?
All I know is that I don't actually know who I am, and that is okay. I never will. In fact, it is in those moments, in deep conversation, in love, face to face with beauty, those moments where I've entirely lost myself, where who I am no longer matters, a simple thought flashes. This is enough. I don't know if God exists. Psychologically, I find myself happiest in some sort of connection with this great mystery. That feeling where I simultaneously understand more than I did before and become ever more aware of the fact that I know nothing. And that's why my conclusion is going to be so unsatisfactory to you. I didn't solve myself. I'm not an enlightened being. Far from it. I'm with you. Side by side. I'm down here on the ground with you. And I think I'm happier. I'm figuring things out. I've been doing all of the boring stuff. I meditate, journal, do yoga, read a lot, try to see friends. Although it hasn't always been graceful on my end, I have tried to focus only on the people and things in my life that I actually value. And I try not to be as hard on myself. this answer is going to be pretty anticlimactic because this is my life. I don't know what you expected. Your answer, your path, it's going to be yours. And, never trust anyone that tries to apply their personal salvation to your personal mystery, especially if they put a price tag on it. You're not going to find a resolution. I guess overall, I've leaned into this strange sense of hope. That's not right. I've actively embraced it. And no, this isn't just a be happy conclusion. That's far too passive. This is an active battle each day, a rebellion. It's a choice I make every moment. It is action through painful contemplation, and sometimes I mess up, but I always return. Making this was an active battle against my aversion to vulnerability. It was an attempt to feel a little closer to everything, to feel united. It's an act of love. I'm a very lucky guy, and in the eyes of most, I shouldn't have anything to complain about. And I recognize that despite my luck, I've been pretty miserable lately, so I wanted to figure out why. Misery spreads, after all, to those around me and to future generations. And also, what's the point of improving the material conditions of the world if most of us still end up kind of depressed? Yes, I couldn't have done this without being able to eat, without shelter, without water, without a support network, and I recognize that spiritual betterment requires some level of material betterment. But also, material betterment is pointless and maybe even destructive if it's only used to sustain itself. This pursuit has to respect our deep existential needs as humans, first and foremost. For love, for meaning. Abstractly, this is what I want to figure out next, that which lays beyond me. Why do I actually want to make the world a better place? Well, I like this place, I like you, and each day, more and more, I'm starting to like myself. I want to be a good person, not just to feel good, not just to do good, I want to actually be good. And to do that, I need to open myself up. Yes, the pain of vulnerability is worth it. I can't explain why, but it does feel right in some strange way to hold some faith in this life. And for all of this, I needed to be okay with myself first. I think I am now.